Let's pick up where we left off 2 weeks ago. In his first 17 tries of the 1977 NASCAR Cup season, Richard Petty won 6 times, 5 Cup events, and 1 of his qualifying races. He also finished in the top 5 13 times, in the top 10 14, led 1,080 laps in 12 of those 16, and finished 8 times on the lead lap. By the King standards, it may have been, but not dismal by any means. In the last 15 races of that season, he finished in the top 5 7 times, the top 10 9, even led the points by 8 after Pocono. He led 323 laps in all but 2 of those events, and 5 on the lead lap, but finished the season second in points, 386 behind eventual title winner Cale Yarborough. In those first 16 events, it had been difficult to find someone that would have gone against Petty as taking his 7th title. But in the last 15, he led 4 races with 1 lap only and another event with 2 laps only. And those 5 on the lead lap? Was that a harbinger of things to come? Here we take a look at part 2 of the 1978 season. And was it really all that bad for the King and his team? I don't know about you, but I remember where I was at when the direction of my life was formed, Michigan International Speedway, on August 23, 1974, when I saw Richard Petty's fire red and petty blue Dodge go screaming by. Since then, probably just like you, we've been hooked. From our first media gig at the tender age of 15 in 1983 with Grand National Scene, to printing our own Supercars Today magazine in the 1990s, hence our name. Nothing against our open wheel friends, but if it has fenders, our nosy nature wants to find out the who, the why, and the how. We don't necessarily interview these people, we have conversations. So please subscribe to our channel and hit that bell to be notified of new content every Tuesday at noon. Thanks for watching, and please like, comment on, and share these videos. Today on the program, in doing their research for the Switch, the Pettys looked at the Chevy Monte Carlo and the 76-77 Buick Century. At the beginning of the year, Oldsmobile drivers were complaining that the side window was too big, letting in air and making the car unstable. Whereas most models of the Buick Century, the side window was smaller, therefore restricting air. But I guess as the season went on, those high speeds didn't matter, as Cale racked up another 10 wins and a 3rd straight title. But anywho. 1965 NASCAR Cup rookie and former driver Dick Hutcherson and his partner Eddie Pagan were car builders, and they prepared A.J. Foyt and Ron Hutcherson's red Buick Centuries that ran well at Daytona, and sold one of them to the Pettys. And then also picked up a Chevy Monte Carlo from longtime independent and competitor Cecil Gordon. You thought the press hounded Richard up until now during this season. Just imagine how it was when he got to Michigan August 20th. So what was it like joining the biggest of the big 3 automakers? Richard himself said Hoss Ellington, among others, had been especially helpful, as well as Banjo Matthews. He said he had been contacted by General Motors engineers and received help from them in the form of information, such as telling us what to do, where to look for certain engine pieces, and giving us stock numbers to use in buying stuff. We'll come out running as strong as anybody ever has the first time out in a new car. Expounding on some of the issues that have happened in 1978, Richard talked about things that were out of his control. He said, "It's just been a bad year. Our fortunes have soured. It's not a question of driver ability. Things that have happened have been out of our hands, myself and the crew." But the King, who already owned 185 wins up to this point, was hoping that the performance in the Monte Carlo could erase any doubts to his ability, believe it or not. It could hurry up my quitting, but I don't think that's going to happen. Heading into Michigan, there was a lot of talk that the Petties perhaps weren't serious about their switch, perhaps calculating a move to force NASCAR to give the Magnum some help. People pointed out the Petty Enterprises, Inc. can ill afford to lose the lucrative parts business that they had, which is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars per year. After all, would you buy a Chrysler part from a man who's openly saying Chrysler can't win? Known as Brother Bill Frazier, the one-time chaplain of NASCAR, was handling the switch for the Petties. He said, "We expected that talk, but we're serious about this move." He said the team was spending upwards of $100,000 to get the Chevy competitive. "I think that indicates how serious we are. We're not getting rid of the Magnums, but we're not going to spend any time on them either." And on the subject of trying to quote-unquote strong-arm NASCAR into getting what they wanted, then President Bill France Jr. chimed in and said, "In all the conversations we had with the Petties, both sides shared a common desire to be fair to all concerned. We could not come up with a rules change that will be beneficial to Richard and at the same time be fair to those campaigning other makes. Richard did not want NASCAR to give him an unfair advantage. We feel that it is the close competition between a number of drivers, regardless of the car makes involved, that has developed NASCAR's Cup Series into the most competitive and popular form of auto racing anywhere. However, Richard did not come to me demanding anything." As far as the Pentastar, Dick Maxwell, manager of vehicle performance planning of Chrysler Corporation, said, "We are not very happy about it. We have had a very long and successful relationship just to see it go away." He did say he did not know the fate of the Chrysler parts distribution and kit car business, the two major weighing factors that the Petties had to contend with in the switch. Maxwell said, "There's no way to speculate on the parts, but the kit car business is separate from the racing operation and is likely to continue. The Petties are a supplier on kit cars. We buy assemblies from them on a bid basis. It's strictly a quota job." Leading up to Brooklyn, the King said Hoss Ellington, the car owner of the #1 Hawaiian Tropic Donnie Allison Chevy, had been especially helpful, as well as car owner and builder Banjo Matthews. He said he contacted General Motors engineers and received help from them in the form of information. He denied, however, that GM engineers were at their shops to help repair their engines. But would Richard be a godsend to GM? Perhaps somewhere down the road, but Petty himself said GM is currently on top of the world of stock car racing without him. They've been helpful, and I would hope they would be even more helpful in the future. But they don't need me because they're winning without me and have been for some time now. But he did admit they have been, quote-unquote, telling us what to do, where to look for certain engine pieces, and giving us stock numbers to use in buying stuff. The Randleman Rocket admitted that they purchased several outside engines, but Petty said it's possible the team may use an engine it built for the Michigan race themselves. "We'll compare what we have with the other two. There's a chance we'll go with our own and have the others as backups. It just depends on what looks strongest." Said Junior Johnson he'll be competitive for the first few races in the new car. But give them a few races, and they're going to be awful hard to beat. But coming out of the box and winning, I don't think that's going to happen. After timing in at 14th, the King explained it ran just about like we expected it to. We've been working on it for 3 weeks. We're going to have to learn, that's all. Everything's a little different right now. The car is a quicker reacting car. It isn't as forgiving. He concluded in talking about the switch. It was a difficult thing to do. Even Darrell Waltrip chimed in. He's at a crossroads of his career. He suffered some injuries last year, and he's not a spring chicken anymore. I know at 31, I don't do some of the things I did at 25. And at 38, I probably won't do some of the things I do now. You want to be bold, but not too bold. For the first time in another make in the last 9 seasons, Richard ran as high as 3rd and was 6th when he crashed with 10 laps to go, and they placed 14th. I ran over something and blew a tire. We were real happy with the car and the way it ran. For our first try, we'd have been satisfied with a fourth or fifth. The team had to borrow another Chevy Monte Carlo from another competitor. I delivered the car Tuesday night, said Henley Gray. Richard is just using it. I'm returning a payment on the favors he's done for me. I hope the car handles and runs good. But there were other issues. Petty, who's been wearing a rib brace on his right side since his accident in the August Bristol race here in 1977, bruised his left ribs when he crashed at MIS. I think I only have bruised ribs. I haven't seen a doctor yet. He closes at midnight. Now, a lot of you kids probably won't remember this TV show or this actor and singer, but Grandpa Jones of Hee Haw fame was the Grand Marshal for the Southern 500. On the show, he and others would sing a song kind of appropriate for the Petties in this 13-month span, wouldn't you say? Heading into the Southern 500, a race which eventually Richard would only claim once in his career, he figured he'd be starting out about even with the other competitors when qualifying began. The reason is a new surface. Benny Parsons says you can forget all the setups you had in your books. I had already forgotten mine since I'll be in the Chevy and not the Dodge. He added, I understand the racetrack is a lot smoother and somewhat wider. Any improvement at Darlington will be a big help to us. During the race, the 43 won 134 laps with the 7-time champion behind the wheel, but then he had to call on Dave Marcus, who was knocked out of the race in a wreck 12 laps earlier. It's the ribs, Petty said, wincing while he took oxygen, drank milk, and tenderly touched his sore left side. They were okay when I started, and I didn't think they would bother me, but they ached from all the pulling. 2 or 3 weeks of rest will take care of them. Petty climbed back into the car on lap 226, but again called for Marcus on 329. Surprisingly, though, the car only lost 1 lap, and they finished third, and even led 1 lap, and remained 6th in points. Surprisingly, the next weekend at Richmond, for race number 23, the 43 team was not the number 1 headline, as Neil Bonnet, the defending race winner, and Darrell Waltrip fought it out for the win, and with a few laps to go, the number 88 bumped the number 5 out of the lead, spinning Bonnet into the dirt, and Waltrip went on to win, but was showered with booze. Now, Petty led 13 laps and dropped out with rear-end issues with about 40 laps to go and remained 6th in points. While the governor of the state of Georgia, race fan Jimmy Carter would attend events at the Atlanta International Raceway and promised, if elected, he would invite NASCAR competitors to the White House. And on September 13th, 1978, he lived up to his promise. Now, we'll get into that later, but here's a few images from that visit. Well, the race at Delaware didn't help much, as Petty qualified 11th and finished 27th after suffering ignition issues, and they ran only 269 laps, didn't lead, and still remained 6th in points. After the, Dover debacle, Petty was still upbeat coming into Martinsville for race number 25, a place he had won 14 times before. I'm right pleased with how we've come along with the Chevy. We knew it would take a while to adjust, and I guess we might be a little bit ahead of schedule. I know some people say I'm over the hill, but the truth is, I might not be as good as ever. But that didn't matter, as others recognized the contributions he'd made to sport, as he was invited to serve as Grand Marshal and starter for the Caraway Speedway 200 at Asheboro, near his hometown. The event was for late model sportsman cars, with the points counting toward the national championship. And among those entered were Butch Lindley and Bob Presley, both locked in a tight battle for that title. Perhaps all that cheering and adulation at Caraway helped, as the King almost won his first pole since the season before at Martinsville here, starting second, finishing sixth, and completing all but 4 laps. And those short track results seem to get better, heading into North Wilkesboro, the 26th race on the season, as the team qualified 8th and the King finished 4th, only 3 laps down this time. Heading into Charlotte, Petty talked with the media about wearing an electronic pain-killing apparatus for the past 2 weeks to ease aching ribs. It's simple, but it does the job. It does it more safely, I think, than drugs would for somebody in sports, particularly race car drivers. Here's how it works. The patches are attached to a key nerve point that affects the painful part of the body, and the juice is turned on. The little charge short-circuits the message part of that pain, and it's sent back up to the nerve to the brain. What it amounts to, really, is electronic acupuncture. You're just using electrodes, patches, rather than acupuncture needles. In my case, to keep my ribs from hurting, the patches are placed on my shoulder blades. It's a little aggravating at first, having something unnatural sticking to you, but you get accustomed to it. I'd hate to think I'd have to run 500 miles Sunday, the shape my ribs are in, without it. Said John Hayes, who convinced Petty that by wiring up, he could race without the pain that several times has led him to call on a relief driver. The device is called a trans-scrutinous nerve stimulator. I'm sorry, folks, I probably butchered that. Trans-scrutinous means under skin, and actually it's not new. Richard, an avid fan of all sports, thinks the device will play an increasing role in enabling athletes with certain injuries to perform, if pain alone as the reason for them being sidelined. It already is playing a role, said Hayes. John Drew of the Atlanta Hawks is using the gear, and so is Drew Pearson of the Dallas Cowboys. During the race, it certainly didn't seem to hurt, as Petty started 9th, led 102 laps, but then dropped out after 220 of those, and finished 27th. But you can see the improvement in the performance of the car and the driver. Race number 28 was Rockingham, and Petty was talking about the advantages of the new brand of car he was driving. He said the Chevy Monte Carlo is a big car, bigger than, say, an Oldsmobile, but it's 2 inches lower in front than a Magnum and 2 inches narrower. The Magnum has got 140 square inches more frontal area than a Monte Carlo. It's like putting a big wing on the front. The improvement continued as the team led 18 laps. The King started 11th, and they finished 6th. Oh, and by the way, during this race, guess where driver Elmo Langley and owner Henley Gray got that pretty poppy red Buick Regal body from? Thank you, Petties, for returning the favor. They're going to talk about Atlanta for a long time to come, screamed one headline. By the way, this started when a hot catalytic converter on a fan's car caught fire in the grass in the infield. This is something you didn't hear often. I apologize on behalf of NASCAR, coming from either Bill France Sr. or Bill France Jr., and that was following the Dixie 500 at Atlanta International Raceway. So why was the NASCAR president being so contrite? He said there were errors caused in the scoring of Donnie Allison's car on 2 separate laps. He, Richard Petty, and Dave Marcus were fighting for the win in the closing stages of the race. France said that in the sanctioning body's haste to declare an official winner, it erred in switching the winner from Allison to Petty. Speaking about Donnie Allison, France Jr. continued, "We're sorry for the grief we put him through, and to Richard for sending him up here, the press box, and getting his hopes up. We've been in this business for over 25 years, and the scoring is our responsibility. We just didn't do the job." What did Petty have to say after leading 61 laps and placing second? "I thought I won it. I did, but according to the scorecards, I didn't. It's all over now, I'm going to forget about it. I've got to go home and get ready for another race Tuesday. Boy, that headline sure wasn't lying about they'll talk about this one for a long time to come. Towing out west for the final race of the season at the Ontario Motor Speedway, the King had one more chance to pull off a victory and not go a whole season without a win. He said that other drivers steer clear of him on and off the course. They all but tiptoe past his pit. Whatever is wrong, they don't want to upset it none, he laughs. It's only because he was such a big winner all of his life that the 43 winless races are a big story. Shucks, said Richard. Cale went 3-4 years without winning. So did David Pearson. Can he laugh about it? Petty answers by laughing about it. You might as well. The car doesn't care none. For the race, the Pepsodent Kid qualified third. But right before the green, outside pole sitter Cale Yarborough had a problem and had to pit. So the whole line moved up one spot, and Richard started number 2. He led laps 3 through 5, another 27, but dropped out on lap 83 due to engine failure, producing his first winless Cup season since 1959. Most fans are unaware that NASCAR scheduled a Cup race at the Phoenix International Raceway January 26, 1964, and Richard Petty and David Pearson were scheduled to compete. However, construction delays forced a cancellation of that event. But the number 43 was scheduled to show up at the end of 1978. Just never been able to fit an Arizona race into my timetable before, said the King. But STP, one of my sponsors, wants us to show up in the West. They're spending a lot of money making commercials. I just got through making one with Johnny Cash. His first time out on the racetrack in Arizona, Petty set the fastest time and broke the track record from the year before. I talked to some of the guys about the setup and gear and the track shape, he said, but that's about the closest I've been to knowing anything about it except the USAC races I've seen on TV. When you've been doing something for 20 to 25 years, it doesn't take long to find out where to run and where not to. We hit it pretty right. We only had to change one spring. When the Napa 250 took the green flag, Petty was gone. He led 109 of the 156 laps and finished 11 seconds in front of Jimmy Insolo, who won the title that year. Also in the field were Neil Bonnet, Bobby Allison, Ray Elder, and David Pearson. After taking the checkered flag, at first Richard was ready to pull down pit road, but then was directed toward victory lane. But the crowd was going crazy. Although the Phoenix win was not the same as a regular Cup victory, for Petty, he acknowledged it was a good sign. I hope this is the beginning of something, he said. At least we'll go through the winter knowing we won the last race. It feels good to win here because it's the first time we've been here. 1978 totals? Well, they weren't bad. The King finished 6th with 3,949 points and 1,313 points in the third leg, which actually placed him 7th behind Dick Brooks. He started 30 races, had 11 top 5s, 17 top 10s, and was about $500 short of $200,000 in prize money. He led 51 times for 417 laps and led in 15 different races. He ran 8,906 laps out of a possible 10,298 and didn't finish 1,382 of those. The previous May, the King won the Republican primary election for a seat on the Randolph County Commission, and in November, in the general election, he won one of those 6 seats to become part of the commission. However, on Wednesday, December 6, 1978, Petty was reported as resting comfortably at Greensboro Hospital following surgery to remove what was stated to be ulcer scar tissue which he had suffered earlier in the season. According to a Petty Enterprises spokesperson, Louise Laughlin, Richard was still sort of sedated and will be for maybe a day or two. She said the ulcer Petty reported earlier in the year had healed fully, but doctors wanted to remove any scar tissue that had formed and might give him problems later. Apparently it didn't at Daytona in February. So to sum it up for the 1978 season, what was it? Body styles? Engines? Ignitions? Transmissions? Richard's failing health? Leave a comment in our section here on YouTube, and if you wouldn't mind, hit that like and subscribe button. Thanks for watching, but we're going to take the next 2 weeks off, so please tune back in November 28th at about noon.